Hey everybody, welcome to another Vectortuts Plus video tutorial. Today we're going to be creating a stylized first aid icon in Adobe Illustrator. I'm Ryan Quintal and I'm going to be walking you through this intermediate level tutorial. So let's fire up Illustrator and get started. Let's create a new web document, and 1000 by 1000 pixels is kind of my default. I'll call this first aid. Now we're going to start pretty basic, just by selecting our rectangle tool and drawing out a rectangle. Now this exact size is up to you. A little bit wider I think is pretty good. Now we're going to use one of Illustrator's default swatches and color it red. And in our color palette we'll select the stroke and we'll clear that off. Once you have your rectangle made, I want to do a Control C and a Control V and just move this out of sight, out of mind. We'll use that later. Now we're going to use Illustrator to apply a series of effects to this to give it that 3D look. First, we're going to go to Effect, Stylized, and give this rounded corners. 30 points to be exact. Hit OK. You can see the effect that had here. Now to make this 3D, we're going to go to Effect, 3D, Extrude, and Bevel. And the settings here are pretty specific. So on the x-axis, we want a 34-degree rotation. On the y, we want a 28-degree. And for the z, we want a -18. You can turn on preview to see what that's doing. Now we're going to add to that a 74-degree perspective. And I'm going to increase this to, say, a 90-point extrude depth. And you can update that. So that's looking about like how I want it. We're also going to change the bevel to all the way down, tall and round. The height on which we're going to set to be 15 points. And now here with our light is where we're really going to play with stuff. Move your first light all the way up and to the right. A little bit upwards like that, so you can see the lights coming from the top of the element. Then we're going to select this new light icon, and we're going to make that one come down and sort of face the front of the object, so this right here is lit up as well. And you can see we get these nice highlights along the edge. We'll hit OK there. And once that's all said and done, we're going to put a little bit of a drop shadow on it. And we can do that with Effect, Stylize, Drop Shadow, and you can really use your own settings here. The tutorial calls for 63%, 4 pixels or points, 11 pixels or points, with a 5-point blur. If you turn on preview, you can see what that does. I liked it a little bit lighter, so we'll say 40% there. Okay, great. We're off to a great start. Now it's time to make our first aid white arrow. That's the kind of signature of these first aid kits. Let's grab our rectangle tool again, and we're going to make this gray so we can see what we're doing. Just make a long rectangle. Now with Control C, then Control F, we can take that and holding down Shift on our keyboard, rotate it so we get the plus sign. You can select these both and use the Pathfinder. And if you don't have the Pathfinder open, go to Window and select Pathfinder right here. And the Pathfinder has a Unify command, which is in the top left. So that makes that a whole object here, both of those combined together. Once we have this First Aid Plus made, we're also going to round its corners. And we'll do Effect, Stylize, Round Corners. We'll turn on the preview. Obviously 30 is a bit too much, so we'll try 10. Hit OK. And that's perfect. We're going to color this white. And in our Symbols palette, if you don't have that shown, Window and then Symbols, you can see that Shift Control 11 on a PC. Create a new symbol. It's a graphic, and we're going to use the center as our transform point. Let's call it First Aid Plus. Now you can delete that right off your canvas. You don't need it anymore. Instead, we're going to take that cross that we just made and we're going to map it to the front of our first aid kit right here. And the way we're going to do that is, first we'll show our appearance palette. If you don't have that, Window and Appearance. I have mine down here. And in it I can search for the extrude and bevel that we made before. Click on that. And with preview on, we're going to select Map Art right here. And the symbol we're going to use, First Aid Plus. See, that's a bit big. So using Shift and Alt, I'm going to click a corner and I'm just going to bring it down until it's about the size I want it. Yeah, that's good. Kind of nice and big right all over it. We'll hit OK there. And OK again. And you can see this is taking on a first aid box type of feel to it. Now, our old rectangle that we made, it's time to take it and make it basically the separation of the box. Let's go to Effect, Stylize, and round its corners. And we used 30 pixels originally. So you can see that there. We'll hit OK. And this one, we're going to switch around. And we're going to make just an outline. And if you're wondering how I did that, I'll show you. Right down here in your color palette, you have a little switch button. So you can do Shift X, and that'll swap the fill and stroke colors. And since we had no stroke color, it makes it invisible in the middle. I even beefed this up to a 2-point stroke. Now we're going to go to Object, Path, and outline the stroke so that becomes an actual object. And I'll zoom in here so you can see what that's doing. So this has made 2 separate strokes and basically made a compound object, like we created that from 2 shapes. Now we're going to apply some 3D to that as well. Effect, 3D, Extrude, and Bevel. And these settings are pretty similar to our original. 34 degrees on X, 28 on Y, and -18 on Z. The perspective was 74 degrees. This time extrude depth, we're only going to take it to 5. I'll turn on preview there. You can see what that's doing. It's creating a nice little effect. We're also going to reproduce our lighting situation. So that was one in the top right and one down here on the left. And up a little bit so there's some highlight to it. Now we'll hit OK. And to get a sense of what we just did here, drag this right over your first aid kit. And you can see, if you select both objects and use the align commands at the top, what exactly this is going to do. This is going to be the separator, the sort of point where the box would open up if this was an old sort of World War II first aid kit or metal first aid kit. So what I want you to do is now take this and position it. I use the arrow keys right about in the middle, midway between your 2 top and bottom of your box. That looks about good. Now, with the pen tool, we're going to draw on a mask for this. That starts here and goes over to here. We're going to cut it diagonally and make a triangle only of what we want to see. Then we're going to use a gradient, a black and white. And we're going to drag that down. In fact, I'm going to swap with the black and white. And move that down just so the black's just on the top and fading ever so slightly into the white. That's perfect. Now make sure if you're using the default gradient, this isn't going to go all the way transparent for you. You want to go into your color palette and select here and go to RGB in a web document. And you can see that created a very different type of black. And I'll hit Control-Z so we can zoom in and show you this. Here was the default gradient Illustrator gave us. I selected the black on the gradient palette, and right here is the black to white. Instead, I'm going to go over here to our context menu and pick RGB and watch this black transform when I click it. A much deeper black, you can see. Now that we've made that, we want to shift select our separator, if you will, our box open point. And then in our transparency menu, use the context menu to make an opacity mask. And you can see here I went a little bit too far on that edge, but that's fine. I can scale that down and make it fit. Then I'm holding down shift so that scale stays right in line, and you can see it makes a really nice sort of box separation point. Once that's all set, it's time to add in these latches that will sort of hold this box together and give it some personality. The way I did that is I went to the rounded rectangle tool and I made a sort of tall piece here, and then I just squished it a bit. Not holding down shift, but just made these edges a little bit more squished. I colored this light gray, so in swatches, went over here. Something like that. Since that's harder to see on video, I'll go darker at first. I took this object, did a Control C and a Control F, and then held down shift and dragged this down. To about here. And let me turn on stroke here so you can see exactly what's going on. I'm going to cut this right here across. And I also took a straight line right above that. And I'm going to cut this here. I'm going to select all three of these and use the Pathfinder's divide command in the lower left. And then I start deleting out the elements I don't want, which is this big chunk at the bottom, and you want to use the white direct selection tool for this. Deleted that, and deleted this little odd middle piece here. And that is going to be our latch. Now the second piece to our latch is sort of the bolt that holds them together. That's another rounded rectangle. This one is a lot thinner. And I did a Control C and a Control F on that and shrunk it down and just kind of made the inner portion to that. Then selected them both, right-clicked, and made a compound path. Now for coloring, these two will be very light gray. We're going to keep them that light gray. This will be hard to see, so forgive me. And then for this one, made it a gradient, but for the black, I went for a more lighter gray. And the white, I actually kept fairly white. Made it a top to bottom sort of diagonal gradient. Now with all three of these, I turn off the stroke. And this is going to make up our latch. So for our effects, we'll select the top and do these one at a time. Effect 3D, and extrude and bevel. It's becoming a popular thing in this. For this, we're going to go negative 47 degrees on X, 32 degrees on Y, and negative 22 on Z. I'll let you preview that and see sort of how that looks. The extrude depth is not going to be 50 point. Let's bring it way down. In fact, 12 looks perfect. Here for the lights, we're going to create two lights. And one's going to be on the top left. If I had to guess, that's probably about 11 o'clock. And then right underneath it, in sort of a parallel line, we're going to get the second one. And before I hit OK, I will fill this out to be 57 degrees in perspective. And I'll hit OK. Then right underneath it, I'll go to Effect and simply apply the extrude and bevel to the second object. I'll select my third object, and you know what? I just decided he's going to be a little bit darker at the top. Maybe this. Yeah, that's better. For the third object, he's going to get the same. Effect, Apply, Extrude, and Bevel. Now you want to position these things relative to each other so that this is sort of a believable latch. You can size this down a little bit. Size this one down a little bit. And then I just tap with the arrow keys until this looks about right, and I'm pretty happy with that. Now I'll highlight all of these things and Control-G group them. Also, I'll highlight everything on my first aid kit and Control-G group those. Now that would be Command-G on your Mac. Take your first latch, Alt and drag and make a second. And then take these both and size them way down with Alt and Shift until you can position them where you want. And I actually made the second one a little bit smaller so that perspective held true. Then I use the arrow keys to adjust. I may even want these even smaller so that they're not really hitting the bottom. And that's about where I want those, so that's kind of an eyeball thing, but use your art fundamentals with perception and depth and perspective and all of that. And then we're just going to come and put a little gloss on this. Select everything and Control-G to group. And the gloss is really easy. Just grab your pen tool. Start at sort of an inside rounded corner. Follow that highlighted edge. Scoop it. And if you're not too familiar with the pen tool, even though this is an intermediate tutorial, that's a click and drag once, twice, then just click once for a straight line, click and drag, and that's looking pretty good. Then finally, to close it off, I'll click the original point and drag to make a sort of rounded shine. In our gradient palette, we'll use the default gradient. And instead we'll put it backwards so it's gray on the left and go into white on the right. Go a little bit more up. And then with that selected, go to transparency and put this into overlay mode to create a little bit of a shine there. I also took this down to about 60% for transparency, and that was it. I mean, I personally liked this a little bit better in screen mode. I found it was a little bit more of a believable highlight, especially when you start taking screen mode down to even something like 40% and changing the gradient a little bit. But it's really up to you. Have fun with it and experiment with whatever works. And as you can see, this is a really great looking finished product, and it works in multiple sizes too. If you scale this guy down and you see him at smaller sizes, it's really extraordinary and very identifiable at those smaller sizes. So a great icon, and that is how to create a stylized first aid icon in Adobe Illustrator. I've been Ryan Quintal, and this is for Vectortuts.com. In the meantime, keep designing.